Jess, I'll say one thing. If there's one takeaway for today, it's good Lord, people, get yourself some help and don't spend $500,000 trying to figure this out for yourself, right?
It's table stakes.
Yeah. You have to do this and you have to get out in front of it. And a partner like Clearwater could make a really big difference.
And if you do it well, it can be a competitive advantage for your business.
Welcome to the Healthcare Grind, where we cut through the noise in the healthcare industry to bring you the latest trends, innovations, and insider insights. I'm Jess Hearthcock, and I'm joined by my co-host, Lon Hecht, as we embark on a journey to connect early-stage healthcare companies, payer executives, and investors with the knowledge and perspectives that matter most. Get ready to grind in the fast-paced realm of healthcare innovation. And for more advanced content, go to healthcaregrind.com.
Hey, everyone. This is Lon Hecht. Welcome to the Healthcare Grind. It's great to have you back for another episode. I'm joined by Jess. Jess, please give us a shout out.
Hey guys, how you doing?
I think they would say they're doing great, Jess. But we have a great guest today, and that's Baxter Lee. Baxter's the CFO of Clearwater Security. Great get for us today because we can talk on this episode about all things security. So Baxter, could you give a little bit of background about yourself and maybe a little bit about your organization as well?
Sure. So as you said, I'm the CFO of Clearwater. I've been with the company about 6 years. My background's in finance, started in banking, happened to be in the healthcare industry, and then did a couple years in private equity. Moved to Nashville in 2010 to work for a company called MDON, where I did a few years of corporate development and then transitioned into finance roles. And I've been CFO of a couple of different companies over the last decade. So Clearwater is a healthcare-focused cybersecurity consulting and advisory firm. And we work with hospitals, ambulatory practices, and digital health companies to execute effective security programs, protect their businesses.
Awesome. Thank you for that. So this episode, we're going to take a little different tack today. So as you know, our listeners are typically early stage founders, investors, and also health plan and other healthcare executives. So when we talk today, we're going to talk a little bit more, maybe focused a little more on the health plan side of the business. But when you think about an early stage company, and Jess, you had to deal with this with your startup, you run as fast as you can, you do everything under the sun to try and get a deal with a health plan or a risk-bearing entity or whoever that may be. And then all of a sudden you get them to say yes and you go into contracting and all of a sudden security hits and the brakes come on, right? And it can be a nightmare. And it's one of those things that catches early stage founders flat-footed every single time. So I figured we could kind of kick it off. And if you could tell me a little bit or tell the audience about what are those kind of things that a health plan would typically be looking for in the security side, and how do you handle that as an early stage founder?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think one of the biggest challenges for early stage companies and startups today, because healthcare is now the most targeted industry in the world for a cyber attack. And so health plans and hospitals and other large companies are very diligent about which organizations they do business with. And if your business model is to access data or access their systems in any way, they're going to want to make sure that you have very strong security and compliance to protect that data, right? And not cause any sort of third-party breach or issues with the information that you're accessing. So what we're seeing now is that a health plan, particularly a large hospital system, even with a startup, right, is going to ask a very long set of questions. That list is getting longer every day. To make sure that those companies have the effective programs in place. So as a startup, it's table stakes, right? You can no longer sort of just focus on developing your platform and a good product and then figure out security later. You really need to have a good security strategy from the ground up day one in order to win those contracts.
So how do you do that? So I guess the first question is, what are some of those, you said table stakes kind of questions that they're going to ask? How do you get yourself prepared for this when you're early stage? Most of these investors have raised maybe some angel funding, $500,000, $1 million, don't have a ton of money to invest in this. What are those questions? And then how do you get yourself prepared for this?
Yeah, I mean, it's a daunting task for a small company, right? It really starts with a governance structure and having somebody on your staff that's responsible for security and compliance. And does that person have the skill set to do that job effectively, right? And from there, you have to have policies and procedures. You have to have a risk management program where you're assessing where, if you're going to have patient data, EPHI in your systems, you need to know what those systems are, what the threats and vulnerabilities are to those systems, what the likely ways that attackers could access those. So that goes into good risk management around those systems. And there's specific requirements within the HIPAA security rule around how to do that. That's one thing we work with a lot with customers. From there, you do technical testing of your environment, so penetration testing and scanning of your network and your systems, and a whole list of other things that go into an effective security program. So as a startup, that's very daunting and very difficult to pull off. Even hiring a security person at that stage could be very expensive, and there's a shortage of talent in the market. So, having an effective partner that can help you do that on an outsourced basis is really, for those earlier stage companies is a good strategy, because otherwise it's, those first 10, 20 hires, you're going to be, wanting to hire developers and salespeople and, it's all your go to market, right? But you need to allocate some resources to security and compliance. So the best way to do it, we believe, is through an outsourced partnership. And we talk a lot about converting security and compliance to a competitive advantage. So rather than it being a liability where it's something that trips you up, as you mentioned, Lon, in the contracting process, if you go into those early sales conversations and say, we take security and compliance seriously and look at this program that we've developed, you're going to get through that process faster. You're going to win those contracts more effectively and be able to execute on your strategy to grow your business. And that can be an advantage to you if you do it in the right way.
I can imagine that. I can imagine how different it is to be able to go into a health plan and say, here's my strategy. Here's my team. You probably know them well because they're a well-known vendor in the marketplace. Can you talk to us about how the early partnership looks? Do you look at startups differently? Do you look at mid-sized companies differently? Is there a plan to kind of grow with the company as they can continue to get more contracts?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's in compliance and security is a journey, right? You're never fully secure or fully compliant. And it's all about what your plan and your strategy is. And so if you're a growth stage company, right, your plan needs to incorporate where you're going to be, 6 months, a year, 2 years down the road. And so you've got to have a program in place that's really thinking about not only today, but where you're going in the future. We work with our customers through a program that we call Clear Advantage, which is basically think of a fractional program with a CISO that you can access and other subject matter experts that can be available on a fractional basis to support the company. So you get the benefits of our scale and expertise without having to pay, full freight for hiring those types of resources.
So you said CISO. Can you tell our audience what that means? I do know what that means, but I want to make sure they do.
Yeah, Chief Information Security Officer, right?
Okay,
Lon
great.
just needed a reminder. It's okay.
I just needed a reminder. Thank you. So what are some of those things, jumping back a little bit, what are some of those things that when you think about a security or tech vendor questionnaire that's going to come over, what are some of those things that they need to be prepared for?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, they're going to look for things like your policies and procedures, your governance structure. Do you have a documented, compliance officer, security officer? So that's where they start. Then they're going to look at how do you have, technical controls, what your technical control environment looks like. Do you have, detection on your network? Do you have on your endpoints? What are you doing to test your application? If you develop some sort of mobile or web application, are you testing it on a regular basis through penetration testing and scanning it for vulnerabilities? Do you have a program in place to respond to those and be able to remediate those types of issues? Do you have an ongoing program for risk analyzing the systems that have electronic protected health information? It's all that kind of stuff. And it comes down to, can you articulate that you have a program and that you have a roadmap that you're executing from? And the roadmap, you don't ever have to have everything checked off perfectly, but you need to be able to demonstrate that you know what you need to do and you're working towards a future state that is a level of maturity that would be sufficient to pass their security protocols, right? And so typically a startup's not going to be able to have everything in place, but if they can show that they understand what the requirements are and they've got a plan to get there, that's half the battle. And then you're obviously got to follow through and be able to demonstrate that you are doing those things over time.
What a fantastic program in place that y'all have and can offer startups. I mean, as a former CEO of a startup, it's so valuable to be able to pull resources like that in, especially when you don't have to hire an entire team. I think that can be really daunting and people think, well, that's the only way I can get through this. So I'm going to flip the script a little bit. So for all the different startups that listen to this podcast, let's say you do something internally. You get your first 1 or 2 contracts with your health plan, and you do have a breach. Talk about how that can impact you long term, if not completely, go under if you're an early stage company. But how that can really impact the company besides obviously worst case scenario.
I think it can be devastating for an early stage company, right? It's almost impossible to recover from that because it's all about trust. And once you lose that trust, it's very difficult to regain it and to get customers to agree to exchange data with you or let you access their system. So I think it's important that you focus on it on the front end and try to do things in a way that avoids that. And part of having a good security program these days, right? So again, I mentioned healthcare is the most targeted industry for cyber attacks. So it's more of a question, the way we talk with our customers, of when, not if. So it's almost impossible to prevent a breach completely. It's how you contain that breach. Do you have the detection capabilities within your environment to find it quickly, shut it down and be able to respond effectively with good backups and disaster recovery plans and things of that nature? So what is your resiliency playbook, and and if you can respond quickly and mitigate the impact of that, you can still survive a breach. So there's things you need to do on the front end to adequately just protect your business and try to avoid what we call the stupid breaches, right? The stuff that should never happen. But there's always going to be risk in operating in this environment. So how do you minimize that risk and then protect yourself on the back end so you can respond very quickly? But if once you have a breach, if you're a third party vendor, it's going to be very difficult to regain that trust in the market.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you just said it's all about trust. So I'll say, can you tell us what high trust is? Because we hear about it all the time.
What a good segue.
And yeah, there you go. I'm killing it. Could you tell us a little bit about high trust, why it's important, what it's all about?
Yeah, so high trust is a security framework that allows organizations to sort of attest to what their security program is. So high trust is not a security program. It is really a measurement or a certification that says these people have an effective program, right? It was a consortium of a lot of organizations, largely payers, that got together and said, hey, we need a mechanism to assess, the people we're working with. So it's a framework that organizations can use to grade their security programs and gain that trust or confidence in their partners that they want to do business with. So that certification is something that folks try to hang their hat on as, hey, we're doing the right thing. I will caution people, though, it is not a program, right? There is a lot of work that goes to get into high trust. You can't get high trust certified if you don't have the effective policies and procedures. You don't have good risk management. You're not, you have to do all these things in order to get high trust. And I think that's where there can be a lot of confusion in the market that, hey, we just want to be high trust certified. Well, that you can't just jump to the answer, right? You've got to do the work on the front end. And then, high trust is only about what you include in scope. So organizations can have portions of their business that are high trust certified. There's been, unfortunately, plenty of organizations that have had breaches that are high trust certified. So again, still, right, it's not a bulletproof answer to say I'm high trust certified. It's a great way to validate that you're doing a lot of the things that you should be doing. But it isn't a perfect, strategy to say I'm certified, I'm good to go.
How long does that process take? And what percentage of companies actually achieve high trust certification?
It's a good question. They've actually evolved it quite a bit over the last few years. So if you go back 4 or 5 years, there was, I think, only one level of high trust certification. So everybody was trying to achieve the same bar, which was very high. And they've created some different steps along the way to allow earlier stage companies to grow into a high trust certification. So there's different levels that you can achieve now. So they actually have a level for startups that's much easier to achieve. And then it's building blocks that you can grow from the net. Once you do the foundational work at the first level, then you can use that to grow into the next level and the next level. So that's the way that they've evolved to make it more accessible for smaller stage companies. Generally speaking, though, even that first level, people recognize that is for very immature startup companies. So if you're going to commit to going down the high trust route, you pretty much have to commit over 2 to 3 years that you're going to get to that highest level. Otherwise, it's really not going to be as seen as effectively as just getting that first level accomplished. So
How important is it to be high trust certified? And then can you give us an idea cost wise, what it takes to be on that journey? So from that immature startup all the way to the highest level of high trust. So how important is it? And then what do those steps look like so founders can think about what they need to earmark for this?
Yeah, I would say high trust is more of a business decision than anything, right? If your customers are saying, we want you to be high trust certified, then I would say be high trust certified. But it is not necessary to be high trust certified to have an effective security program. So the two are not, mutually exclusive. So you can have a great program and still win business in healthcare today. A lot of startups do and growth stage companies without having high trust. So high trust does come with a lot of additional expense. There's a lot of pre-work that has to be done to conform what you are doing. You may have good policies and procedures, but now they need to conform to the requirements of high trust. So you've got to go through this exercise of updating all your policies and procedures, implementing those in your organization. It can be a big task, and then you have to go through the certification, and then you have to do your follow on annual updates, and so it's a big financial commitment. So for us, we look at the ground floor, right? What are those foundational elements that you need to have a good program? And if your clients are requiring it, great. We'll help you get to high trust certification. But a SOC 2 may be just as effective in some cases, which is another way to validate your current program, or having just good documentation around what your roadmap is and what your strategy is for security and how you manage security in your environment. If you can articulate that effectively, oftentimes you don't need these third-party attestations to validate your program, which is really what they are, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right. So I'll come back to what is SOC 2 in a moment, because I think that's important. We're going to learn a lot of different things today. But once again, going on that journey, is there kind of like a certain cost amount that they need to be thinking about? I mean, are we talking tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands for that first step in that certification?
It depends on the level you're striving for, but that first level, for the entry level for a startup, you can, I'm totally just make ballpark numbers.
I get that
it's going to be, I will say, less than 50, maybe less than 30,000, depending on what partner you work with and how. And again, it's how much do you already have in place, right? So you've got to, if you have nothing in place, it's going to cost you more. It's going to take you longer to get there. A larger high trust certification, at the highest level, can be over 100,000 or more to get there. And then you have your annual maintenance and updates that you need to, conform with. So it is again, if your customers are a requirement, it's a worthwhile investment, right? But it's not a absolute that you have to operate in healthcare today.
Yeah. A question about kind of the finances, since Lon, you kind of took us down that path. So you're the CFO too of Clearwater. So being not only in security, but as the CFO, if you were going to tell startup companies or early stage growth companies, how much of your budget needs to be considered when you're looking at security and compliance as a whole? I mean, are we talking, 2% of your budget, 10% of your budget? Because I feel like that sometimes can get overlooked with young companies.
Yeah, that's a good question and really hard to quantify without knowing, what is your business, right? If you're a consulting firm, you maybe not, need to spend as much because you don't have, your customers' data, right? If your business model is to go into health plans and say, I need, terabytes of data to analyze for, value-based care, analytics, because I'm going to apply all these things, do these great and wonderful things to save money, engage with patients, and I need access to all these systems and all this data, right? You're going to need to spend a lot more on security and compliance. And, you may just be a mobile app that interfaces with patients and there's no access to, either health plan or hospital, patient records that would qualify under HIPAA. So you don't need to spend as much on compliance or security in that way. You need to protect the PII and other information that you would access, but you may not be under the HIPAA requirement. So it really comes down to your business model and understanding how does your business model interface with the regulatory requirements, and what does that mean from your customers in terms of what you're asking to access in their systems and the amount of data that you're going to take on their behalf. And the more that your business relies on that, the more you need to spend on it.
That makes sense. I feel like in my brain in healthcare instantly goes to data. I mean, I feel like everyone needs data today to execute on whatever strategy or product they're trying to sell to health plans or provider groups, or, enter into VBC arrangements. So I feel like data is such a big component now that if you didn't need, gobbles of data, like, what are you doing?
Right.
Well, that's
I'm very
actually where
much
I was going to
thinking
go
of mine.
next. That you took me exactly where I was going to go, and that is most early stage companies. It's give us all your claims data, and we'll let you know what we can do, right? And that's hard, right? So first of all, that adds a lot onto a sales cycle. People need to be very mindful of that. Once you want to try and get data, that's a monster in a lot of different ways, just not from the compliance and security end, but also in terms of the lift for a payer and how long it takes for them to get over. I mean, it really does take your sales cycle. It can make it long, but it can be a necessary evil as well. We could talk more about ways to short circuit that in future episodes. But when somebody wants to get data, what are all of those considerations from a security standpoint they need to be thinking about? I want early stage founders to hear it from you. What are those things they need to be thinking about?
Yeah, I mean, I want to start by saying I am a finance guy. I'm not a technologist, right? And or a security expert. I have been in this business for 6 years now. I think I've learned quite a bit over that time. But we have plenty of people that we could introduce folks to if they have those more specific questions. But generally speaking, it's all about the flow of data, right? How does it flow, and then where is it stored? And so, under the HIPAA security rule, it's all about, the understanding that flow. So I think the rule is written as create, receive, maintain, or transmit, electronic protected health information. So any system that creates, receives, transmits, or stores that data needs to be analyzed for the risk to those systems that could exploit that data, right? And so what you need to do is then understand what is your control environment? What are the protections that you have in place? Did if you're on your system to protect that data. And then how have what are the likely threat and vulnerability combinations that could exploit those controls to be able to access those systems and then access the data, right? And that can be a complex process if you have a very complex environment that you've built to, extract data from health plans and put it through an engine and then store it over here and do it. I mean, the more it moves around between systems and it's stored and transmitting between systems, the more vulnerability there is at every point along the way that needs to be assessed. And so that is the challenge, right? And having good data and data flow diagrams and understanding that and architectural diagrams to know your environment and to know the way it's constructed is important to being able to effectively have a good security program. And you'd be surprised, probably, maybe not, that a lot of organizations build and don't really think about that, right? And so it becomes a Frankenstein of like data's all over the place and nobody really understands where it resides, where it's being, where it's transmitting through. And that creates a lot of vulnerability and risk in this market that I think is underappreciated.
Yeah, that's not shocking at all to me. Not at all from startup days. So something else that I feel like this topic kind of deserves is, depending on what state you're in, there's regulatory requirements. Depending on what line of business you're serving, there's additional requirements for security. So if you're working with a company that's offshoring data, but if you're working with the government line of business, you may not be able to offshore components of that data in different states. I can think of several relationships over the years where the arrangements were very different depending on the state. Even if it was the same client, but they did business in different states, we had to follow different types of regulations. Can you kind of touch on that? And does Clearwater help your clients understand that component as well, and obviously is cognizant of it?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the biggest challenges right now is not only do you have sort of the HIPAA and sort of federal requirements, which are also changing, by the way. There's new, not requirements, but guidance documents and things around security and healthcare that the HHS and others are encouraging, healthcare organizations to adopt. But also then the states are looking at things differently, and that's changing too, right? And so you've got a complex web of regulatory and other, things that you need to navigate in healthcare, depending on where you're doing business and how you do it. And so, obviously having, good counsel is really important. And then, having a partner that can help you navigate that to make sure that your compliance structure is set up in a way to meet all of those requirements is also critically important. If you don't have that person on staff, internally, which I think is even harder, to have one or two people to try to do all those things, that's kind of really difficult today. And so one of the main value points that we bring to the market is really our depth of experience. So we have teams of people, teams that do privacy and compliance work and cloud security and technical security and risk management and other things that you can tap into. So you don't have to go out and hire individuals, to do all those things, individually and try to build that program yourself, right? And everybody trying to recreate the wheel, with every startup. That is just, it's really just not cost effective. You could spend $500,000 to stand up your own security and compliance program, which is really kind of a non-starter for, an early stage company. So, accessing, a firm like ours where we have, 120 consultants that have this deep experience in all these areas that you can leverage with a playbook and a program that you can subscribe to, really is just much more cost effective and more efficient and gets you to where you need to be faster than trying to slog through that on your own. And frankly, it takes the pressure of that off of the leadership team so they can focus on executing their business strategy, right? And go out and win those customers and do the product development that they need to do and trust that someone is really taking care of security and compliance. When you try to do that yourself, with all those changing regulations and things happening, it's just too daunting and can be, you're inevitably going to miss something that could be pretty severe for your business.
So question for you, is there information on your website that kind of gets early stage founders thinking about the foundational elements they need to, plan for? Is your website a good place to start?
It's a great place. We actually, part of the ethos of Clearwater, going back to our founder, is really providing educational content to the market and really helping educate the market on these challenges and what they can do to meet security and compliance standards and requirements. So a ton of educational content on our website. You can find very specific information around digital health companies and some of the early stage companies we work with. We also do a monthly cyber briefing open to the public. You can find that on our website. We had it yesterday, and we are keeping track of all the changes in the market, the threats that are out there, the issues that organizations are facing, changing regulatory landscape. It's a great way in an hour a month to really stay abreast of all the challenges and changes in the market. So that can be found on our website, and all the recordings from past cyber briefings as well with webinars and those types of things are on our website.
That's great. What is your website? What is the?
It's clearwatersecurity.com.
Clearwatersecurity.com. Perfect. Hey, just jumping back, I mentioned SOC 2. Could you tell us what SOC 2 is? And are there any other acronyms that our listeners should be thinking about?
So SOC 2 is another framework that is a way to validate your security program, right? And so it's typically required to be an audit firm. So usually a CPA firm you have to have the CPA type license to be able to perform a SOC 2, and it's really an external audit of your security program. Again, there's different levels that you can achieve. So it's typically a slightly more efficient and less costly way than high trust. And again, a lot of your partners and organizations would see that as a external validation of what you're doing and a good step towards a strong program. So it's just another framework to assess your program and its state, how well you're managing security in your organization.
Gotcha. Are there any others that we should be thinking about? I know we're getting a little later in the episode, so we're going to wrap in a minute. But are there any others that come to mind that we should touch on? We didn't really touch on HIPAA. I think most folks know what HIPAA is. If you want to give a 30-second overview on that, go for it. I don't think it hurts. But are there any others that we should be thinking about before we wrap?
I mean, I think you can't take HIPAA for granted, right? If you're in healthcare, you have to know HIPAA. There's 3 rules under HIPAA: the HIPAA security rule, the privacy rule, and the breach notification rule, that all outline really what you should be doing as an organization operating in healthcare and how to best protect data. The security rule has very specific requirements around what I mentioned earlier, with policies and procedures and technical testing of in your environment. Risk analysis is probably the most important one of those, in understanding the threats and vulnerabilities to all the systems that we talked about. That's generally where, when you see that there are organizations that have had corrective action plans and fines and penalties following a breach, 90% of the time is they failed to perform an adequate risk analysis. So it's really where I would say one of the biggest failures in healthcare is people not understanding what a risk analysis is and how to do that effectively. So I think that's something that I would advise any business to understand: the risk analysis requirements and how to do that the right way, because it becomes the foundation of your security program. If you know where your data is, you know what the risks are to that data by doing an appropriate risk analysis, that becomes the roadmap that you need to execute against to remediate those risks. So that's all in there. There's then the privacy rules, which are very specific to, privacy, as you would imagine, and breach notification around how you would notify patients if there were a breach of data. And then you need to understand your role in healthcare. You've got, a health plan or hospital as a covered entity that's ultimately responsible for that data. And if you're a vendor to them, you're a business associate to them. And you have to sign business associate agreements with those covered entities, which basically contractually require you to meet certain requirements that flow down from the businesses that you want to be exchanging data with. And so there's a lot. You need to understand all of those things, and make sure you're doing them effectively, that you understand what the business associate agreements require. You have counsel that guides you through that, right? And so these aren't things to really take for granted in healthcare anymore. I think there's sort of in today's environment, you really need to have a strong program that really accomplishes all that. And that, if you do that well, then you're well on your way to a good security program.
That's great.
So, Jess, I'll say one thing. If there's one takeaway for today, it's good Lord, people, get yourself some help and don't spend $500,000 trying to figure this out for yourself. Right?
It's table stakes.
Yeah. You have to do this, and you have to get out in front of it. And a partner like Clearwater could make a really big difference. So,
if you do it well, it can be a competitive advantage for your business.
Exactly. Jess, do you have any other questions before we ask Baxter how to get in touch with them?
No, Baxter, it was a pleasure. Thank you for teaching us all so much today.
How can our listeners reach out if they'd like to?
Yeah, thank you so much for the opportunity. Jess, it's always great to reconnect. And Lon, great to chat with you today. You can email me at baxter.lee@clearwatersecurity.com. Happy to connect you with any of our experts. We would love to provide any educational content, or just if you have questions, help you navigate some of the things you're facing. So we'd love to talk to you and see where we can be helpful.
Awesome.
Well, thank you so much. And we're going to wrap up the episode today. Thank you again for listening to another episode of the Healthcare Grind. For more advanced content, please go to healthcaregrind.com, and please subscribe on your favorite podcast network. We really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
As we wrap up this episode of the Healthcare Grind, we want to thank you, our incredible audience, for tuning in. If you found today's insights valuable, don't forget to hit subscribe and leave a review on your preferred podcast platform. Your feedback fuels our grind. For more exclusive content and updates, visit our website, healthcaregrind.com. Until next time, keep grinding, stay informed, and lead the charge in shaping the future of healthcare. This is Jess and Lon signing off from the Healthcare Grind.